What's the most disturbing secret you've discovered about someone close to you? The 24 hours before my dad passed, stage 4 lung cancer, he was in the ER and then the ICU, and we were unable to be with him because of hospital rules. My mother, sister, and myself had been texting and calling him all day and got no response. My mother even called the hospital and spoke with one of his ICU nurses who said he was awake and communicating fine. He passed very quickly at 3:30 a.m. the next morning. We were allowed to be at his bedside, but by then he was no longer conscious, so we said our goodbyes and he was gone. Later that morning, while my mom slept, I was calling cremation services to schedule his body for pickup at the hospital, and going through his bag of belongings the hospital had returned to us. His phone was in there, and I wanted to read all our texts and take some comfort in my last words to him. I opened his phone, and all our texts had not been read. Not mine or my mom's and sister's. I thought this was so odd, but figured he must have been suffering so much that he couldn't find the strength. I began to scroll through his apps and noticed a chat app I'd vaguely heard of. I can't recall the name, but it essentially works like WhatsApp. I opened the app and saw a single contact with a female name. I started reading and realized my dad has been chatting with this girl hourly for the last 24 hours and as far back as I could scroll. He was calling her princess and telling her he loved her, and she was saying she was scared for him and wanted to know what was going on, why he was in the ER, etc. I scrolled back enough to know that this was someone he was having at the very least an emotional affair with. My grief was completely hijacked by hurt and anger, and a week later I tracked the girl down and spoke to her via DMs and found out she was young. She was 17 when they met. He was her high school bus driver, and she told me they had been dating for almost 2 years. My dad was 66 years old when he passed, was dating someone younger than his grandchildren, someone he chose to spend his last moments with and say his last goodbyes to. I hope it made him happy, but it sure is a crappy secret to live the rest of my life with. A secret that will forever overshadow my entire relationship with my dad with no chance to ever speak to him about it. It's the one secret I wish I'd never found out. I couldn't imagine finding something like that out. You must feel so helpless to the whole situation. I think I'd have done exactly the same in your situation, and I hope you can find some sort of peace. Story 2. I don't know how disturbing this is. It turned out pretty fantastic for one, but not for another. I was adopted and told a silly magical story about my birth parents that most certainly did not seem true even when I was a child. At 57, I learned I was the result of a college affair between a very religious Jewish young man and a very Baptist young woman. She was rushed off to a home for wayward girls to give birth. He followed her there, many states away, begging her to keep me and live a life together, but their families both said absolutely not. Jewish people were not viewed as white in the mid-60s, and her family most certainly did not want her marrying a non-white. Plus, she was a very committed Christian and did not want to convert to Judaism, so off I went into another family. I recently discovered 3 lovely half-siblings, and we're all pro or semi-pro musicians and get along well. I never got to meet my mother. She passed a year before I searched. My father is out of the picture and wants to be left alone, and I'm fine with that. I'm grateful for the love he gave me. It was enough. Another person that was in my non-bio family was also adopted. She was older than me. She tracked down her mom later in life too. She was in a hospital and had been since the day she was born. She was born holistically disabled. Physical, mental, cognitive, learning, sensory. It was violated by an orderly, and she discovered she was the result. Endings to our search are not always happy. Story 3. She was my best friend of 7 years. We had literally been through it all together. I moved out of state with my now husband, but she convinced us both to move back to be closer with her after about a year. We had no real ties to the state we had tried out, so we said screw it. Let's go back. She's basically family. We were also happy to be reunited. She was over almost every night for dinner. We all laughed and talked and had a blast. Best year of my life. Then slowly she started trying to turn my husband and I against each other. Anytime we had an argument, like any couple does, she would text each of us about how right we were, trying to foster animosity between the two of us. With me, she started talking about how she had a plan B for us, that if my husband and I couldn't make it work, I could move in with her and we'd live happy lives together. With my husband, she started talking about her infertility issues and how she wanted to have a kid just like him. She just needed a donor. This all happened at around the same time, and my husband and I compared texts and figured it out. She wanted to take his and have a baby with me. When confronted about it, she refused to admit anything and started lashing out at both of us. It got to the point where she would show up unannounced, banging on the door, demanding a place in our home. It was so terrifying and panic-inducing that we ended up having to move and change our phone numbers. I guess it's so disturbing because I'd never had a friend like her, only to find out that she cared about me, but in such an unhealthy and scary way. But yeah, that's my story. Husband and I are great now, by the way. Good plot for a movie. So glad you and your husband are doing well. Story 4. While my cousin was walking around with her son in the woods, she came across a hunting stand. She climbed it and found a pair of binoculars. Sitting straight forward and lifting the binoculars to her eyes, she saw her own bedroom window. That's to be logical here. If it was a legit hunting stand, it was facing and closer than 500 feet to a residence, which is illegal, which means it had to come down with prejudice. If it was a peeping Tom, well, it had to come down with prejudice. When my brother and I visited not long after, she showed us where it was. We tore it down and literally wrapped it around a couple trees, bent it to complete uselessness. I got an angry call the next day. "Did you tear down a hunting stand yesterday?" "Hell yeah, I did." "That was your uncle's." Her mother's brother. Turns out my cousin reported it to the family and they ignored the issue. When the uncle was asked, he said there was just an old treehouse out there. Even when it was exposed, they didn't really care. They were more upset about the damage we did. Suffice it to say, I have written off most of that side of the family. Story 5. Found out after his death that my great-uncle was a grand wizard in a secret society. Opened a chest in his attic with photos from rallies, lynchings, and cross-burnings all around some rural part of Alabama. We were actually horrified by the discovery, and suddenly realized why he was so negative towards his black hospice nurse who was otherwise kind-hearted and caring with him and the family. We, as in my family, I was 16 at the time and had no real say in what the adults or elders decided, we decided to burn all of it out of intense shame for what we discovered. We held prayer vigils through our local church for the people affected by his hatred. Had I been older, I might have taken some of the more damning photos and forwarded them to people who could have brought closure to victims. I made this at great risk to remain in my family as they would still see this as romanticizing his actions. To my family, simply speaking his name is done so at great risk to your standing on wills or remaining part of the family. So yes, I do feel like it's too late because the only thing I have is that my uncle was a member of that secret society for an unknown amount of time before 1950. My family has prided itself in being very inclusive towards other races or ethnic backgrounds. My 7th-generation great-grandfather was a member of the Underground Railroad. Several of my other great-aunts and uncles were vocal figureheads of the civil rights movement. They acted as anyone with that much history behind them would in a moment of shock. They were destroyed. Blame them if you wish, but please stop blaming me. I didn't make any decisions, and for me, it's too late to report anything because I don't have any useful information on something that happened a very long time ago for me. I do sincerely apologize to anyone who sees their chances for closure going up in flames, but I can assure you that for how many other Klansmen I saw in those photos, surely some of their families have already submitted evidence after their passing. My uncle has literally been deleted from our family history, even in such detail as to remove his gravestone so that people cannot leave flowers for him. We burned the chest in his uniform, stashed in a wardrobe near the chest. So horrified by what he had done, we figured burning it was the right thing to do. I'll be honest, that is the next best thing to do, and those groups aren't that well known anyway. I can't imagine coming across something like that in your own family member's home. Since you're halfway through the video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Story 6. That my mom cheated on my dad for 20 years and still hasn't told him to this day. I'm still trying to figure out what to do and how to go about the situation and exposing the truth about her to my dad, but I'm afraid he would die of a broken heart. Worst thing is, she cheated with my godfather who used to come to this house and drink coffee with my mom and dad every day. My friend had a similar experience as a kid, who found out that one parent was cheating on the other. There's no good time to tell them. Her brother, 14, and her, 18, both discovered that their dad was cheating on their mom separately and kept putting off telling her for a year because it was Christmas. Then she had a business trip, and then it was her birthday, and then it was this, and then it was that, etc. One day she got in trouble and my dad said, "You're a disgrace to this family." And out flew the words that he and mom were not prepared for. She knows it's hard. She knows it will change everything if I tell my dad or confront my mom. She just wanted to give me some solidarity. Story 7. A work colleague appeared on the front page of a national newspaper for a life of fraudulent qualifications. He claimed medical and law degrees, was a brigadier in the Army Reserves, and was the CEO for a major health fund. He actually was a brigadier in the Army Reserves, but that and the health fund role were largely built on the fraudulent qualifications and a progression of jobs also based on these claims. In reality, the only qualification he actually held was as a mortuary assistant. Not even his wife knew. The fraudulent degrees had been gained when he was in the Army Reserves recruiting and he had access to submitted position applications. He came undone when he applied for a government job and some red flags were raised by the recruitment people. He tried to withdraw the application, but didn't realize that an application for a government role has the same weight as a statutory declaration and cannot be withdrawn. It all went south very quickly, and he ended up doing jail time. The absolute freaking audacity to apply for government work while spinning these lies. Story 8. When my grandfather passed away, we discovered that he did not exist. His name was not in any government registry. He was a normal citizen, paid taxes, had a license and everything. Lived a long life, married to my grandmother for over 50 years, had multiple children, everything normal. Still, to this day, no one knows who he really was and why he had a false name. Another one, my mom received birthday cards with money in them for years from her parents. She kept the cards with the money in them, saving to buy a piano or sentimental reasons. My sister, who has repeatedly stolen from family members, found the collection of cards or money and took them. My mom only wanted the cards back when she realized what happened. My sister denied everything. Screw you, Emily. Story 9. When I was young, I had vague ideas about my uncle being dodgy. At family events such as weddings, etc., my parents would tell me and some of my cousins to stay away from him. When I was in year 8, we were doing a lesson in citizenship class where we had to cut out pieces from a newspaper. No idea why, and I came across an article saying he'd been recommitted to Broadmoor Prison. Went home and Googled him and found out he'd been in prison in the 80s and had been in and out of prison since for several offenses. He also tried to sue the Sun once for defamation since they printed something incorrect about him. He was awarded 1p by the court because it technically was defamation, but it was agreed that what they had printed couldn't have damaged his reputation any further. All I know is that he was in a halfway house for a long time. However, from what I've gathered, he was released around 2 years ago. Story 10. My brother was stealing money from father who had dementia. This went on for a year. And then I found out about it because the bank who had my father's mortgage called me, wondering why it hadn't been paid in 6 months. My father's bank account went into the negative around this time too. And when I confronted my brother about it, he said, "Well, I gotta pay my bills." I was about to take control of all the accounts and make sure crap got back on track, but my father ended up in the hospital and passed shortly after that. My brother also stole some of my inheritance too. In the end, he stole over $5,000 from his dying father. This one is not mine, but my cousin's. One night as a kid, I heard my parents having an explosive argument in their bedroom, which suddenly went quiet. The door was closed and locked. I found out during a buzzed phone call from my mother it was because she attempted to shoot my father with a .303, but it didn't go off when she pulled the trigger as there were no bullets. They were both horrified and just stared at each other, apparently. They're still together. Oh my god, that last one. I have so many questions. Story 11. So my grandmother, who's been estranged from my family for a long time now for a multitude of reasons, has this weird thing where she has to share food with people. Are you ordering steak at the restaurant? Well, oh boy, she's got to order the same thing even if she doesn't like steak. Try her drink. It's really good. Take the first bite of chicken to let her know if it's any good. This always really annoyed me because I hate sharing food. One day I brought it up to my mom and she was like, "Oh yeah, Grandma is afraid of being poisoned, so she wants other people to try it first." So let me get this straight. Grandma thinks someone is trying to poison her, so she has me try the food first? And it makes so much sense looking back because she literally would not take a bite of anything she ordered until someone else had a bite first. Thanks, Grandma. Story 12. Discovered that my sister stole my father's $25,000 Rolex not more than 24 hours after he passed. I only discovered it when her and her husband made a frivolous purchase, and I wondered where they got their money since they were always broke and begging my parents for money. I got suspicious. It hit me that she might have stolen and sold the Rolex. Had the paperwork, ran a track on the sales history, and discovered it had been sold to a pawn shop down the street from where my sister lives. Went to the pawn shop and after a bit of persuasion, got them to tell me who sold it to them, and it was my sister. Me and my mom disowned her. Similar story. As my grandmother took her last breath, she laid there on her bed in her room. My mother, sister, brother, aunt, and I were with her. She was an amazing woman. It was a terribly sad event to lose her. My aunt began putting lotion on her hands. At the time, I don't think any of us thought much of it. I think I recall thinking, "That's sweet." It was a little strange, but I just thought she was doing it because my grandma's hands may have looked dry and it was maybe the last time she'd ever be able to do something like that for her. My sister yells out in a very angry, aggressive tone, "You freaking witch!" We all kind of step back like, whoa, what the heck just happened? What's going on here? We're all puzzled looking at my sister like, what was that about? She then says, "She just slipped her rings off her fingers." That was a bad day. My aunt then rushed the sale in the house even though my mom didn't want to sell it at all. My family has been fractured ever since that day. It never ceases to amaze me. Not only that people with absolutely no shame and no scruples exist outside of fiction, but also what they're prepared to do in order to satisfy their own greed. Story 13. My best friend of 25 years confessed to me that they believed themselves to be a sociopath, but they said it like they were proud, followed by a joyous, "I don't care about anyone but myself." I immediately recoiled and began begging them not to believe that, and tried to cough up examples of the contrary. Over the next year or two, things got especially chaotic in our world, and I began to step back and observe them more closely. Over time, I realized that they were right. Not only that, but they had been crappy, cruel, and highly manipulative to me for decades. They dated and brought around the worst people imaginable, people that would try to ruin your life and turn all your friends against you if you expressed disapproval. After a mountain range of covert passive-aggressive stabs, one day I woke up to who they really were and kicked them out of my life immediately. Bear in mind, there was a long, slow build-up to this. There was a spell of healing, which is still ongoing, and lots of holy crap moments in retrospect, but things have been great ever since. It was like realizing I'd been on some kind of slow intravenous poison drip for decades and finally yanked the IV from my arm and stepped into the light. Story 14. My extended family on my mom's side has a strange practice of turning horrific family events into funny stories to tell at family gatherings and the like, I believe mostly as a way to deal with the trauma. The only stuff that doesn't get turned into fun stories is the stuff that no one knows how to process and just wants to bury. And that stuff I've only gotten tiny glimpses at, probably for the best. The one that stands out is when my grandmother let it slide that my grandfather was in the secret society, participated in lynchings, and was really proud of how good he was at it. Or when I found out later in life that the only reason I saw him growing up when none of my cousins did was that he knew where my mom lived but not his other kids. That us not visiting wasn't an option. Which did make sense, considering his house and everything that happened in it was, in retrospect, weird as all hell. Like hanging out with the mute grandkids of his new wife as they played with deceased rats and Barbie clothes in a dollhouse made of reclaimed driftwood levels of weird. Story 15. So my now husband, engaged at the time, and I are teachers and did a couple years stint in bush or rural Alaska. It was pretty intense, but a great adventure. Learned a lot we wanted and a lot we didn't. We befriended one of our colleagues, an older single man who seemed friendly enough. We would often go over for dinner, go hiking, and go shoot his gun collection at a local rural beach using the school's Honda. Rural life, no animals or local fauna were harmed. He took on the role of an uncle figure for us. We stayed at his Airbnb or spare bedroom at his house in the city on vacation once too. Now in our second year teaching there, he brings along this woman at the start of the school year who he claims is his niece, and she never leaves his house. He claimed she was having trouble living with his brother and she was taking classes online to graduate, and she confirmed this with myself and other women in the village. Cut to spring. She leaves for home separately from this man and people ask why. He claims she patched things up with his brother or her dad and went home. It turns out he met her online, and her father tracked her down after she contacted a local woman about her situation and sent a state trooper to escort her home. She had been reported missing for 8 months prior. Messed up part was, on top of going to court for that situation starting the following summer, he tried to coax another woman offline to live with him the following school year. And it turns out that entire chat history was a sting by the FBI. He's in prison now, until 2043. Yo, what the flock of psychotic seagulls. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy. What's a secret you will never share personally? Story 3 was epic. See you in that video.